Hey everybody, welcome to the Summit Bid Gallery, and today we are going to talk to you about some lenses, and one lens focal length in particular, and that is the 85 millimeter. And we're approaching it today from the angle of for landscape / mountain photographers, which like 85, that's not really what it's known for, right? It's a portrait lens is like, well, and you would know, you've taken hundreds and hundreds of portraits with it, so.
Yeah, I mean, I have the 85 1.8 on here right now from Sony, and that's been my most used lens for sure. But people do call it a little unorthodox when you use the 85 for landscape. But especially for you and for me, we use it a ton for landscape.
Yeah, I actually have wound up using it a lot. So, and it's kind of an interesting, I actually go back and forth on it because I think what the argument that you're probably coming up with your head right now is like, well, isn't 85 in 7200? So why would I buy an 85 lens specifically for landscape? And I think there's a strong argument to be made for, and there's a strong argument to be made against, like just using the 7200. So we're gonna try to approach both, but I think I'm gonna start off with kind of talking to you about how I started using an 85 for landscape photography. So several years ago, like I switched to Sony and I shot a lot. I used a 7200. It was my most used lens. I love the 7200. And one day I was kind of going through my photos in Lightroom and I was noticing that I was shooting a ton of my shots were between kind of 75 and 90, like a vast majority. And I'm like, that's interesting. You know, that's right at 85. There's a focal length 85. So several years ago, it was over a fall, I decided to like, you know what, I'm gonna give it a shot and just use an 85 instead of a 7200. And I really liked it. So I shoot mostly panoramas for my landscape photography. Probably about 70% panorama and then, 30% single shot. And I really kind of fell in love with how it worked with panoramas. I loved first off, it's so much smaller and lighter than a 7200, and we've both lugged 7200s up mountains, and it's kind of been
I mean, yeah, kind of coincidentally enough, I'm selling my 70-200 now to actually pick up the G Master 85, so.
Yeah, interesting, yeah. So, and like for me, the main 85 I've used is the Sony G Master 85 1.4. I've played around with other 85s, I've played around with the 1.8, and for me, I just kind of had a little bit of a love affair with the way that this particular lens renders. Interestingly enough, the image behind us right here is was shot with this lens. It's a panorama, but it was shot with this exact lens. And I have so many, like I'm gonna, we can be going through examples right now where like I've taken with the 85 and like, so let's go over some of the pros and cons. Like, so for you, what do you like about 85 for landscape photography?
Well, for landscape, this is more prime general, but I love the 85 partially for its focal length, but also as a prime, it's sharp through all the corners. It's also just normally sharper. The autofocus seems to be more accurate for primes compared to the 70-200. Every once in a while when I was shooting with the 70-200, we would end up, I would end up taking like, 8-10 shots, and then like 1 or 2 of them every once in a while would be out of focus. Mm-hmm. And that would become just a little problematic when you're trying to stitch panoramas.
Right, right.
I like the character of the 85 too, like especially yours. The G Master is
right, and that's where I was gonna go first and foremost, is that like there is an intangible, I don't know, magic with primes. They're not as practical. Like you can't say that it's as practical. You can say that it's lighter, well, yeah. And if I'm taking most of my shots between 70 and 90, right, then it makes sense because it's like less than
used,
half the
yeah.
weight, right?
And that's been the thing for me. Like, I've justified this 85 because, you know, I have this big 70 to 200 that I have to lug around, or this like little tiny 85. Like, this thing weighs like what, 8 ounces maybe?
Oh
Maybe
yeah,
a
and you
little
take
more.
the hood off of that thing and it's tiny.
Yeah, no, look
yeah,
at
it's
that.
just like, yeah.
So
Yeah.
that's been the big thing, and it's easy to bring on all shoots, not just mountain photography or landscape photography. But when you're going into the mountains, like, you don't want, you know, this, what, the 70 to 200 is like 3 pounds, maybe a little over.
Right, and I actually wind up using it in a certain kind of landscape photography. So like for me, there's kind of 2 modes. There's I have everything in my car, like all my lenses, all my tripods, everything, and like you hiking like what, tops a mile, right? You can lug a whole bunch of stuff and set up all your tripods and shoot for a long time and all that. And then the other mode is, you know, super fast and light, like we're climbing something or we're backpacking or we're just, you know, going, you know, 18, 20 miles into the mountains. And when that's happening, it gets harder to justify this because like you do get more a bang for your buck, so to say, out of a 7200 or some other type of zoom because you're getting a lot more focal lengths. Like, you know, there are some new 7200 2.8s that are like the Tamron 70 to 180. The new Canon one is smaller and lighter. It's a pound lighter than the 70 200 Sony.
But I do think the big caveat to that is it depends on if you're going to be shooting that. If you go into the mountains and you know you're going to shoot at 85 and nothing much further, then I think that's big.
Right. Yeah, I mean, if your main lens, like, okay, let's say you have a 24-70, that's your main lens, and 85 is a great, like, addition to that to give you a little more reach and a little more aperture and sharpness. Like, one thing we haven't talked about is the fact that these lenses go down, this one goes down to 1.4, that one goes down to 1.8. Yeah. And do you really use that as a landscape photographer? Like,
I mean, I shoot at, you know, 2.8. Or like, you know, there has to be times where I've been in like really low light scenarios where it made sense. Like, it's not often, but it does sometimes make sense if you're not having a ton of stuff in the foreground or whatever, and then you decide, well.
Right. I can think of one time that I used at 1.4 for a landscape, and that was we were actually in the Maroon Bells. It wasn't the same time. Like, we shoot the Maroon Bells a lot. We live in Colorado, so. But we were actually in the Maroon Bells, and we were switching locations, and there was some kind of great light going on, and I felt like I needed to get the shot handheld, so I threw it wide open and shot the pano, and you know, it turned out okay. But the truth is that like this 85 that you're spending so much money for 1.4 on, like mine lives at between 5.6 and f4, like. Yeah. So I mean, that's just the landscape apertures for, you know, kind of what I do, and like, you know, you can do star trails and stuff like that where it's nice to have a more wide open aperture. And I actually I was in a pinch one time and borrowed your 85 1.8. I don't know if you remember that. Yeah, and shot some star trails with it. I can throw that image up. And that was interesting. So, you know, there are some things you can do with aperture, but the truth is that if you're a landscape photographer, you're not buying 85 for the 1.4. That's whereas if you're a hybrid shooter like Brandon, like, see, I'm more of a, like, all I do is landscapes. I do some other things a little bit. And Brandon, you're actually just the opposite, right? Yeah. You do mostly portraiture.
Mostly portraiture, a decent amount of landscape, especially now.
Right.
And then actually the other thing that an 85 comes into, like a big use for me, is when I'm doing, like, you know, taking photos of you and Toby every once in a while in the Avengers. Sometimes to have a person in the photo, or if we're trying to do a product shoot or something, like, huge like advantage to having an 85 where you can kind of blow out the background a little bit. I mean, with an 85 you have a choice. You can choose your aperture. That's the thing that's nice about it. Right. So
yeah.
I mean,
yeah, some people say, you know, you pay for 1.4, it should live at 1.4. Like, I disagree. Yeah.
I mean, you pay for the option of 1.4.
Yeah, I guess that's a better way of looking at it. So yeah, like, I feel like like there's an element to primes. Like you said, a lot of this just applies to primes in general, right? you know, a lot of people say that modern zooms are the same as primes, and like generally speaking, the gap is closing, but there's something about primes that is really special. Generally, they are sharper. They just are. Like I've seen it. Like there's an element of sharpness that is just like, whoa, it's next level.
And then there's character. Like big thing about them is character. And then the other thing is, well, I kind of forgot what I was gonna say, but 85 is not as wide as you think it is. So when you're using an 85 prime and you're taking panoramas, that's a big thing because you can get, what is it, closer to like 40 millimeters in a panorama?
Well, it depends on how many shots, right? How many wide. So like, yeah, that's a really great point. Is that there's some added versatility there, whereas like this shot behind me, it looks pretty wide, fairly wide, like probably 35 millimeters is what I'm guessing, 40 millimeters, like you said.
Yeah.
If you were shooting a single shot, right? So like you can kind of, you know, bust it out wide, but I can shoot a little more, quite a bit more telephoto if I just do a single shot, right? So like you can kind of utilize it that way. You know, one other point I wanted to make is that they do tend to primes cut heat distortion, atmospheric distortion, haze, stuff like that in a different way than I've seen a zoom. And you know, it's just the coatings and the quality of the glass, and there's less glass elements inside of it than a zoom. It just handles things like that better. So like if you're in like a hazy situation, or like you're shooting something a little further away, like you will get a sharper overall image with a prime and an 85, certainly, since it's a semi-telephoto prime. Yeah.
And personally, I kind of like shooting with primes because I love that you can have the option with like a 70-200 to go up to your subject and like be able to figure out the perfect zoom. But I kind of like knowing my primes. Like I know what it's gonna look like. I can kind of imagine the shot before I even take the shot. And that's like something, I mean, you can get that with a 70-200, but you also are then put into a position of choosing, well, maybe I want to shoot it at 70, or maybe I want to shoot it at like 135 or something.
Right.
But I kind of like being able to just, you
know what you're getting.
Yeah.
And that is true. Like you can kind of pre-visualize and you know what you're getting when you have a single focal length and you kind of learn that focal length. And, but you know, like we can talk about some of the downsides. Well, some are super obvious. It's one focal length. Like you have a 70-200, whether it's heavy or not, you have everything between 70 and 200, you know, and sometimes, you know, the difference between 85 and 90 is a huge difference and it's critical. So, you know, well, I say critical, like it's critical to your vision. Yeah. So like, and so like then you're either cropping in post or you cut something off, right? You change your composition, and like sometimes that's a good thing. I mean, sometimes you can be more creative because you are limited. Like limitations foster creativity, I find, but that's a big downside though, is just it's not that versatile overall. And another thing like is that like I have been shooting a lot with primes lately. I have kind of built out more of a collection of primes and zooms, and something that's kind of been wearing on me over time is like I can't take everything with me every time. So like there's like this whole decision process for every shoot. Like what am I gonna take? What am I gonna need? And I've just been feeling like mentally it's been stunting me a little bit.
Well, and having to change lenses in the field and everything, stressful, and you know, being able to throw on just if you have the Trinity, you might even stick with just one of those lenses. But with a prime, like, oh, okay, I have an 18, a 40, and 85. That's what my setup's going to be primarily. You know, changing between those three lenses is going to be a big deal at some point, unless I'm in a position where I only like want to use the 85. But those are kind of rare. Like that's not super frequent that I'm just like only 85 for a whole like landscape shoot. Right.
No, it's true. And you know, it helps if you have two bodies, but two bodies it creates additional complication too. You're less focused. you're kind
weight.
of and the weight.
You're adding weight back into your system,
Like
which is
this can be lighter if you truly do replace the 7200 with it. But if you're sticking this in your bag in addition to, let's say, a 135 and a 2470 and a 16 to 35 and
you lose out on the 200 if you want to take like a 200 2.8 or something with
Right.
you. You can't really do that anymore.
Or you're taking two bodies instead of one body, and one body has the 85 on it. So like really fast, that weight gets made up for like really fast. So, that's one thing to kind of consider. And then, again, a lot of this applies to just primes in general.
Yeah.
I think we're talking about the 85 because it's kind of both of our favorite prime. Like if I'm going to choose a prime, it's going to be an 85. I love it. And on 7200, like, I'm rocking it all the time. But, so yeah, I mean, like, part of this is that I'm making I'm starting to think about like, is a zoom better for me because it simplifies my life? Is simple better? Like we were talking about how having a prime the limitation can create creativity, but does the simplicity of a zoom foster more creativity?
I mean, yeah, that's a good question. I don't know the answer to it.
Right.
So.
Yeah, it's hard to know the answer to. So, but I think the major takeaway that I think I'd like you to take away, maybe is that give it a try. Like, rent one, borrow one or something, and like see how you like an 85 for landscape photography. Like, I'm guessing maybe you never, it's like that's what portrait photographers buy. And if you are a portrait photographer, like what are you doing? Buy one right now.
Yeah, like you should already have one.
Yeah, like hopefully you already have one. Like, but and what's nice is that like most camera companies have a cheap one and an expensive one.
Yeah. Well, and there are pros to the cheap one too. Like, I mean, I'm going with the G Master, or will be, but look at how small this is. That's decently smaller for a two-stop difference.
Yeah.
So
I mean, this is an R4, this is an R3. But similar size bodies, and like this is like. Honestly, like I guess it's less of a consideration with this one. Like this does not weigh much at all. Like just like
tiny.
That's tiny.
Like I think it's 8 ounces or something close to that.
Yeah, no, that's tiny. I have shot some with this lens. I don't like there's a reason he's switching to this one.
Yeah. We'll do like a review of these two at some point.
Yeah, we should totally do a comparison. Like that'd be good. So
because I don't know, I don't want to take away too much from this, but I do like that.
Yeah.
So, let's put it that way.
Yeah. So if you guys have experience with an 85, you should drop it in the comments down below. And
if you want to see the review of these two lenses, which I'm sure we'll do, you should subscribe.
Yeah. Thanks. Bye.
Bye.